All right, now these are not all of, but a really good portion of all the tools that I keep in my truck and that I use on a daily basis as a framer. You can see here I've got lots of different nail guns, saws, routers, air hoses, sawzalls, bags, chalk, all sorts of utter nonsense, but it's the tools that I use to do my job. And of all these tools, the two that I use the most would be a skill saw, or really I guess it's a circular saw, and the nail gun. And the two of these together, combined with, of course, a trusty tool belt, is what makes a framer, and it solves just an incredible amount of problems. Now with the skill saw, you can kind of picture that a hand saw and a chop saw had a baby. It's still ergonomic. It fits in line with your hand, that you drop it through the lumber just like that while you're cutting it, but it's powered, it's electric. In this case, I've switched out my blade with a bigger one, bigger than you're supposed to use, and it allows me to cut 3 inches so I can cut 2 plates at once. The nail gun is much the same. The old school solution would have been to drive nails in with a hammer by hand. Nowadays, we've got nail guns that hook up to an air hose and they drive them in a fraction of a second. Now, what both of these tools have in common that's really cool is they're both made to perform really well while being really lightweight tools. This Metabo saw is the lightest rear handle saw on the market, which is great when you're using it all day long. And pretty much any high pressure framing gun will be super light and have unmatched power as it is. And that's what's really exciting to me about kind of the tool market these days, is people are really starting to dive into the stronger and lighter aspects of things, which is a mindset that at the core embodies what framing is really all about. It even brings you back to the old stiletto hammers. Same kind of concept, super lightweight, but gets the job done. That's less weight hanging from your belt all day long, and it's a faster moving object when it comes to striking nails. While both of these tools I feel have room for improvement, the one that I feel has the most room for improvement is actually this saw right here. Now, I had mentioned that I switch out my 7 1/4 blades with an 8 1/4 blade because it gives me a little extra cut capacity, allowing me to cut 2 plates at once. And the reason for that is I feel like a 7 1/4 blade is kind of an odd size for framing. It gets you about 2 3/8 of cut capacity. You can cut through anything at a 45. That works great. But the thing that I really wish I got to see would be a saw with this size of a blade, a 6 1/2 inch saw with a rear handle design. Because you can see here, this saw has a top handle design, which can be really awkward when cutting in the ways I was mentioning, like a framer. Now again, what's so great about this saw is the ergonomics of the shape. With a rear handle design, whether I'm cutting across a sheet of plywood, I get that, several inches of extra reach, or if I'm cutting down, the saw naturally hangs down in this position. All I need to do is make sure I can get the trigger pulled, and that will get the job done perfectly. And now with this saw, while the blade and the motor are big enough to get any average framing task I need done, the ergonomics are just not there. If I'm cutting across a piece of plywood at waist height, the battery's clunky, getting in my way. If I'm dropping down, same thing, that battery is just in the way. The only thing that this is useful for, in my opinion, is plumbers and HVAC guys cutting out subfloor that they're standing on. So now, here's what I'm proposing. Oh, by the way, this shirt, the Coffin Construction shirt, they're for sale. I should have them linked in the video, maybe, check them out if you do. But if you want one, pick them up. It really helps with the channel, and I tried to make it a cool shirt so that way you'd want to wear it. But anyways, that's besides the point. Now, what I have been wishing I could see in tools for a long time now is a 6 1/2 inch rear handle saw. Now, that might sound odd to some people, but the reason for that is, again, like I was talking about, prioritizing ergonomics in lightweight tools, especially tools that you're using all day, over big, chunky, powerful tools is a very important trend these days. As I mentioned, that Metabo saw is the lightest saw on the market as is. Imagine if they reduced the housing a little bit to only hold a 6 1/2 inch blade. They reduced the guard, the motor housing, everything. Honestly, you could keep the motor the same size, but just shrink everything a little bit, make it a little bit lighter, and now you have an even more ergonomic, big enough saw. Because like I said, 7 1/4 is kind of an awkward size. In my opinion, everyone should be making an 8 1/4 rear handle saw with a proper guard and everything, so that way you don't have to be ghetto and making saws that'll cut your legs off like I am. And then they should have a 6 1/2 rear handle design. So that way you can use the 6 1/2 for your day-to-day light duty cutting, things that maybe you're not ripping in LVL at the full length, things like that. And then when you need a bigger, beefier saw, you can grab the other one. Now I'll use this Milwaukee saw as an example. So let's look at the overall length of this thing. We've got roughly 19 inches, pretty much, right there. And really where a lot of that length gets eaten up is in the blade housing and the table. And in this saw in particular, the battery casing as well, but that's its own issue. Let's compare front to back dimension of the table from the rear handle to the small one. So I've got about 12 3/4 right here. On the small one, I've got 10 3/8. So now imagine shrinking this thing by roughly 2.5 inches back to almost here, shrinking the size of this thing immensely, decreasing the weight because you're removing a lot of the magnesium that they need to build all this stuff. In my opinion, this motor is too big, and they're jacking it up with all their safety software anyways. So this could really be shrunken down. Metabo has found the perfect balance between power and size for their saw. Every other company should be listening to that one. Actually, Makita's not bad. Makita's on the right track. All right, so now let's look at the weight differences on this. I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to balance these on here, but we will see what I can do. 6.25 pounds, we'll call it. Now, 7 1/4 saw, a whopping 9.2 pounds. So we're talking here about a literal 3-pound difference for essentially the same cutting capabilities. Now you'll obviously get a little bit more power and a little bit more runtime out of the 7 1/4, but there's not really many cuts on an average frame site that you couldn't do with the 6 1/2 inch saw. But still, most people, me included, are gonna lean towards the 7 1/4. Now why is that if the 6 1/2 is lighter and does about the same amount kind of things? Because the ergonomics of it are absolutely horrible. I don't know who came up with this design, and I'm sorry to sound like such a jerk, but it's just awful. It's absolutely awful. Like I said, if you want to leave it so that HVAC guys can cut out their floor vents, by all means do it. But I have never, and I don't want to yet, carry this in my truck because I'll always lean towards a rear handle design. Now, if we're talking about, we've got a rear handle design, 6 1/2 inch saw, you can essentially make the same saw 3 pounds lighter with enough cut capacity, enough motor strength, and carpenters are actually going to want to use it. Now, if you're a saw manufacturer and you're listening to this, one, I'm glad you're here and you're actually listening to what people / me are saying. You're probably thinking, oh, but people like this one, it sells. Yeah, that's because people are like, oh, I don't want to buy a full 7 1/4, so I'll just buy the small one. They're not buying it because it's so good. They're just buying it because it is what it is. But the reality is the rear handle design is much more ergonomic and it's much more practical for actual professionals. If a DIYer feels more comfortable with that awkward shaped thing in their hands, that's great. But professionals, especially West Coast guys, will always prefer the rear handle design. Now, anyways, I've got lots of other gripes about tools and things like that. I've got my own gripes for the nail guns, but I just wanted to make this video specifically talking about this saw. I really, really hope in my lifetime someone makes a 6 1/2 inch rear handle saw. I would probably cry and I would buy it. I would buy a lot of them and I would use it every single day as long as they did a good job. Again, like I said, this comes down to the same mindset and the core of what framing actually is, which is getting a good enough quality with the least amount of effort. The same goes into our tools of choice. So whether you're a craftsman, whether you're a tool manufacturer, whether you're just here because whatever, I hope that you understand where I'm coming from. I hope that you agree with me. If you do, please, everyone, just blow up every tool manufacturer and tell them to make this thing because I want it so bad. I've talked to people about like manufacturing one myself, but that's just a pain in the butt. I even cut apart a saw to try to do it. That didn't go well. But anyways, guys, that's my rant for today. I appreciate you watching. Do not take the guards off of your saws, and I'll catch you later.